Hello, and welcome to Research the News. This week's episode is brought to you by Samoa Girl Scout Cookies. And the reason why it's brought to you by Samoa Girl Scout Cookies is that even though we're too new to actually have a sponsor, I, for the first time ever, had a Samoa Girl Scout cookie this week. And what I found was that I absolutely love them. So, until we are big enough to have real sponsors, we're just going to pick people we like. And that is what we're going to do for the first few weeks of Research the News. All right, Gretchen, are you there with us?
How are you?
How are you? I'm doing well.
I heard about
All right.
Samoas, and I enjoy
Yes.
Thin Mints.
What is your favorite? Now I'm not great with Girl Scout cookies. Again, it was my first time. But what is your favorite Girl Scout cookie?
Thin Mints, 100%.
All right.
Thin
Is that what
Mints.
is that? I don't really know what
It's
they
a
are. They're
chocolate minty cookie covered in dark chocolate. How could I not like that? Mm-hmm.
Sounds good. All right, I'll have to try them out sometime. All right. Okay, so we had some interesting things happen after our first episode last week. I had one that was special to me. Gretchen, do you want to tell everyone what we had happen to us last week?
We had our first troll.
Yes.
It's exciting.
So I know, it was real exciting. And I'm actually
We made it, Ray.
When you have trolls, you've made it. Unfortunately, though, actually, I think that's most of the internet at this point is just trolls. So
True.
it's not actually that great, unfortunately. But to give the quick background to everyone, we actually had on our YouTube page posted the video, and someone called us out for hating white people and hating ourselves. And he called us like angry, self-hating progressives. And I nicely explained to him that 2 of the 3 people on the episode were not progressive, and the one person that was made no jokes about how she hates herself.
No.
And
I like myself a lot, thanks.
yeah. And then he said, actually, like, well, you were more nuanced than most regressives, but you still like replace your jokes and they're racist. And it was like, if you replace jokes with racist jokes, they're going to be racist. But I actually tried to use it as a teaching moment where I suggested that he come on the show and tell us where we were being, self-hating. And then he deleted the comment, which was pretty sad because we had a nice little dialogue back and forth, I thought. But oh well. Something else that happened, we actually finished up our researchthenews.org initial version of our Wikipedia page. So you can go there. Any of the articles we talk about on the show today will be posted there. So you can do some research of the news that we're talking about. And it's also available through researchnews.com. And you can even go to research.the.news if you want to save a few clicks. So with that being said, we're going to bring on our first guest here today. Peace, how are you?
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me. I'm doing really well.
Good. And you know what? We're so echo free right now. It's amazing. For those who are watching the live stream, we're back now. We got the audio problems fixed. For anyone listening to the podcast, you missed 17 minutes of terrible footage. So lucky for you if you're listening to the day after and not one of our hardcore supporters, you missed all the fun. But I actually, now that we already did one version of this, I feel like I was proud before because I told Peace that I wanted to introduce her, and I actually had most of the details right. Unfortunately, now it just looks like I've pre-planned this. But do you want me to do the intro again, or would you like to do your own intro this time, Peace?
Sure. Why don't you go for it again?
All right. So Peace was born in Pittsburgh. That's where I met her.
Wrong.
Already.
Oh,
see? Okay.
You did it better the first time.
Dang it.
No.
I am so much better off the cuff than I am actually planning things. So you know what, Peace? I'm going to give it over to you.
I'll take
I want you to
I'll
introduce
take
yourself.
it. Yeah. Thanks for having me. So although I wasn't born in Pittsburgh, I am from Pittsburgh. So raised in Pittsburgh, went to school in Pittsburgh, and that's how I know Ray. We both went to the University of Pittsburgh and kind of ran in some of the same circles. I was doing some music out there with some other musicians, and I think some of them were friends of Ray, and that way we were connected. And then now I live in Philadelphia. Ray's still in Pittsburgh, but I think just we've distantly kind of kept in touch and kept an eye on each other's social media pages and things like that. So by trade, by day, I'm a physical therapist. That's what I do for a living. And on the side, I do music part-time, and I also do a lot of community mobilization, I would call it. And just I have a community space that I run out of my house, and we do all sorts of fun things to bring people together. So
And that's awesome. And I actually like that you changed it. In my initial one, I actually said that I stalked her on Facebook on her posts, which sounds much worse than we kept tabs on each other.
Yeah.
Distance. So that was a much better way of putting it. So thank you for cleaning up, even though I just threw myself under the bus again. So
Totally okay.
so today we want to talk about cancel culture, virtue signaling, and what I'm going to do is we're going to start out. We're going to pull up there's a post that Peace made about a week and a half ago that I really resonated with, and Gretchen wasn't really a huge fan of. Apparently, I didn't know this until
I wouldn't say that.
yeah, well,
I wouldn't say
but what
that's
we
pretty
do
far.
here. Yeah. But what we do here in the show is we want to have different ideas, but we want to be able to talk to each other.
Yeah.
And so before we do that, we always want to talk about our biases. So basically, Peace had a post that you can actually check out on researchnews.org. If you go there, the link is available. I'm also going to just throw it up here so you can see what it's all about. She was frustrated, and I'm going to let her explain it better than I am. But basically, was frustrated about some of the things that were happening with media and people attacking each other and not being able to talk openly. The thing that really stuck out to me was number 5, which says, "I'm sick of people no longer having honest conversations out of fear." And there's a list of 17 here. And so you can check that out on the page. But I think number 5, like I said, really resonated with me and something I wanted to talk about. So before we get into it, a game we play here, Peace, is what's your bias? Since you're the new person here, Gretchen and I will go first. What we want to do is, going into these conversations, we want to let our listeners know where we are biased, and if we agree, if we disagree, if there's anything we want to just point out, just to show that we all have biases and they're okay to have them as long as you're aware of them and are okay with changing them once you get new, better information. So I'll start out by saying that I agreed with most of the post here, if not all of it. I'm very frustrated by the idea of cancel culture and the idea of people being shut down just for having different ideas. And I think we're going to define what cancel culture means before we get into the questions for each of us. But I'm biased in the sense of I'm pro peace. Oh, that I never. Yeah, so I'm on team peace here. So
Good.
Gretchen.
Well,
what is your bias going into it?
I think, I like a lot of people, I think when we read text, we tend to put our own spin on what we're reading. And I think when I read your post, that's what was happening for me. I think a lot of people, when they read text, they tend to either read into more than what the writer was trying to get across, or they can misconstrue, what was being read. So I think for right now, the way I read it is I was reading it with an inflection that I think that's where my questions are going to come from. But I think my bias is that I don't really think there's different versions of cancel culture, and we're going to talk about that. And I think when I critically think about cancel culture and the way it's like a buzzword right now. And so whenever it comes up, I'm more critical of it, and I wonder how much of it is personal responsibility. So that's where kind of my bias comes from, and I kind of want to give people the benefit of the doubt before do you know what I mean? Right. So that's where it's coming from. Totally.
Cool. Peace. Yeah. And obviously you're going to be the most biased here since it's your post, but if there's anything you want to say about cancel culture in general, or if you want to explain your post better than I did, because I was just recapping, but you know it much better than I do. Anything you want to say before we get started on the questions, feel free to throw them out there now.
Yeah. Generally speaking, I mean, everything that I kind of feel on this topic, I did kind of throw into that post, and I'm sure we'll dive into it. But certainly I think that it's been a growing frustration of mine just to see how the tone of my conversations with others has changed over the last year, specifically a year. Of course, it's been this way for a little longer than that. But when it really hit me, we do a series out of the Gathering Place, which is my organization, called Dinner and Discussion. We do those every month on Thursday nights. We have everyone bring a dish, and we sit down together and we talk about really heated topics. Everyone pulls a topic out of the hat, and they're so rich. Well, we did one in the height of the election season, and I mean, it was like, it flopped. Like no one was on, like no one felt safe enough to be honest. And I remember leaving that night so frustrated and so dissatisfied. Yeah. So that kind of goes into where all of my frustrations have come from. So
yeah,
and I think I think going into it, I think I'm obviously, that's why we restarted this podcast, was I'm very frustrated with not being able to talk, and in general, I think virtue signaling, which is also, they're kind of two things that are often interlinked. And so when I was looking up the definitions, like I like to do in the actual dictionary, I found a good what I think is a good definition of virtue signaling. But I also want to get our definitions of cancel culture, because I think that's different things to different people. So just quickly here, I'm going to go over what I read as virtue signaling for people who may not have heard that term before, or may not be familiar with it, who's listening. I'm going to give my brief interpretation of what it is. And virtue signaling is, according to the dictionary, the action or practice of publicly expressing opinions or sentiments intended to demonstrate one's good character or the moral correctness of one's position on a particular issue. And I think the key to me in that definition is that it says one's good character or the moral correctness of their position. And I think one of the things I want to talk about is, where does that moral compass come from? Because if we have a culture that's canceling based off a moral compass, what is that moral compass? So we'll get into that later. That's one of my questions.
Yeah.
But basically, for a dumbed down version, and correct me if you think I'm wrong here, things like wearing a MAGA hat would fall into the lines of moral correctness of one's position. So you're saying, like, automatically you look at someone in a MAGA hat and you can kind of read into what they believe. Or on the flip side, someone who's posting like during the Floyd things that happened this summer in BLM protests, they had that black square that people would post as their Facebook picture, and it was showing that you cared about Black lives. And if you didn't have that post, then it was kind of assumed in a lot of ways that you just didn't care about Black lives, or you saw no issues. And so it's kind of, here's what I believe in, here's what I stand for. I'm going to make it very public so everyone can see how good of a person I am. And it doesn't fall into one spectrum. It can be liberal, conservative, moderate, all kinds of different things. So any additions to that, subtractions, you want to tell me I'm totally wrong, feel free to do that as well.
No, I think you nailed it. Yeah, that's exactly how I see it.
I would go even further, though, because it's more, there are different levels of it. I think that's kind of the part that I'm having a problem with it, is it's a buzzword right now. So people are saying virtue signaling is this bad thing, but it's something we do constantly. Like, we do it constantly. Like, we do it subconsciously too. So it's like, you are going to change the way you talk to somebody and say things differently, and even bring up different things to different people. So we were talking about Ray and I were actually talking about this. And when we were talking about, like, why do we do it? And we're pack animals. We want to be part of something that's bigger than ourselves. So I think we virtue signal to be accepted. And so whenever we look at, like, why people are doing it, I think that's where the gray area is.
Yeah, and you don't really know someone's intention. So it's easy to loop everyone into the same category. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, Peace, and I think why don't you give us your definition of the cancel culture, and then just kind of jump in, because one of the things you just said that I'll throw in there that I don't know, actually, I was going to Google this term, but as I was thinking about it today, I thought of virtue projecting should also be a term, because I think it's not just signaling. So if someone, for example, is wearing a MAGA hat, you also project onto that person what your belief system is. So it's not, it goes two ways, where if you're signaling, hey, look, I'm wearing a MAGA hat, people are assuming different things. Whether if it's someone who agrees, they're like, yeah, it's a patriot and they love America. And if it's someone who's liberal, they're tending to think, well, that's a racist and they hate anyone that doesn't look like them. And so there's all this projecting that happens that I don't know if that's actually a term. If not, I think it should be, but it's something that we do. So
right. Yeah. When you say virtue projecting, you're talking more about your interpretation of what someone's doing. So it's more of like, it's virtue signaling might be active, whereas virtue projection might be, I guess, more passive or internal. Is that kind of what you're saying?
I mean, you're giving a better definition than I am. So yeah, that's this is still an unformed thought for me. It just something that kind of came up. So I think what you're saying is right on. So if you see that, you may not yell at that person, or you may not, but you automatically assume a lot of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's initially started out pretty small. Like, I mean, there's big things if you're wearing a MAGA hat, for example, that's a big thing. But then it kind of reached out into, well, who did you vote for? And what are you listening to? And what TV shows you watch? And it's like, if you watch a certain show, you might be considered someone who is liberal or conservative based on if someone watches Sean Hannity or Rachel Maddow, you probably think, oh, well, that person is, conservative, liberal based on that.
Right.
But could be someone who just wants to be informed. But you are putting your projections on that person, whether you say it or not, and saying, all right, well, this person is flaming liberal or a racist conservative or whatever words you want to use. And just to be clear to our listeners, I am not saying that that's everyone. That's not my terms for it. I'm saying what typically is projected upon it. So is that part of your frustrations you had when you went to this post that you put out there? And what are some of your frustrations with virtue signaling, cancel culture in general, and maybe what a definition is for you?
Yeah, I don't have as much of a problem with formulating opinions about other people, because the thing is, as much as it's a nasty thing to do, we all do it. And I think that's a part of human nature, is that we all have our preconceived notions, we all have our stereotypes, our judgments. And part of being a responsible human is knowing when to keep those internal and not actually allow those to then influence how you then treat that person that you have those judgments against, and also allowing yourself time to be proven wrong. But that's a lost art now. So we're a very reactive society where now we make those judgments, and then without even giving that person an opportunity to explain or justify or whatever where they stand, we then enact a response. And that's where we've gone wrong. But yeah, so for me, virtue signaling, or is it cancel culture you wanted me to define more?
Yeah, define, because I think we kind of talked about virtue signaling, and now just kind of what your definition of cancel culture is, because I think that means different things to different people. Some people don't think it exists. Some people think it's overbearing.
Right. Yeah. For me, cancel culture is enacting a punishment on somebody who's committed something that you would deem a crime or a wrong, but the punishment is devoid of the opportunity for redemption. So almost like a capital punishment, death, a cultural death. And I think that removing the opportunity for someone to redeem themselves is like one of the worst sins you can do. Like if you're telling someone you are beyond help. There is nothing more. We have no use for you. You're stripping someone of their humanity, I think. So that's what I think that cancel culture is. That's why I think it's so dangerous. Yeah.
I was just going to add to that. I think that's the without redemption part. That's the tough thing, because we do it in the court of public opinion, and oftentimes we don't have all the facts. And when I say we, just society in general. And then the problem is, even if other facts come out, people are already set in their ways, and it's like, well, no, but that person's clearly a terrible person, even if it may not be true. And I will just say on a side note, I am so glad we didn't have like Facebook and Snapchat when I was like 20 years old, because like,
oh my gosh.
Oof,
first of all, I would have failed out of college. I would just fail.
Right, I don't know how they do it. I don't know.
I really
it's a whole other world.
Yeah.
I feel so bad for the kids coming up now, because like, I mean, I do watch some TikToks and Instagram lives, and I'm like, well, that's not going to age well. So
yeah.
But Gretchen, I interrupted you. God, what were you going to say?
No. Well, I was going to ask. So I think the big thing for like the cancel culture, it's like another like it word right now, cancel culture.
Right.
And I think there's like this like swell of outrage about two separate things. So there's cancel culture, which is like what you said, like a person that specifically is being like dealt with in a way that devoids them of their humanity and like ruins their life basically because they made a bad decision or said something stupid or whatever. But then cancel culture is also being used in more corporate senses. So like Mr. Potato Head and Dr. Seuss and that kind of stuff. Do you feel that those are two separate issues and or do you feel that they are both cancel culture, just in different ways, I guess is my question.
Yeah, I think there are two different forms of cancel culture. I think that really anything where you're eliminating the use or purpose for something, whether it's that thing can be used to teach a lesson, that thing can be used to educate us, that thing can be used to help us see our wrongs so we don't commit it again, or whether it's a person, giving them the opportunity, as I was saying, to redeem and be valuable again. I think both are different forms of cancel culture. And not that you don't have the right, I think they're both, I disapprove of both, but I do think that canceling people is more damaging than canceling literature or TV shows, or those types of things, because, people are fragile and I think they need to be dealt with fragilely. people are they're hurt easily, and I think that we should never throw someone away. The damage that can do, and I've seen it, and I think maybe I speak from this place of compassion because I've seen it happen to people in my own circle, and I know that, oh my gosh, it took them to like lows of depression and things like that, and we just have to deal kindly with one another, I think. So and
I
the
think
thing is that some things that
Oh no, go ahead.
Well, I was saying that I think that sometimes also the punishment doesn't always fit the crime. I mean, we have situations like Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby. We know that those are people who are dangerous to society and need to be removed because of what they are doing or what they have done. And then you have someone who just expressed an opinion that maybe offended some people, but we have the same punishment. Something seems very off about that.
I think it's, I think we go on a lot of side tangents here. I'm going to make this quick, but I will say I actually did an episode about Bill Cosby on the last version of this podcast. And I said in there, I think that growing up, I'm not a celebrity guy in general. I don't really care what most celebrities think, but there were two celebrities I had a lot of respect for, and it was Mr. Rogers and Bill Cosby. And so when that happened, I was like, oh no, like, come on, this can't be true. And I didn't want it to be true, but it seems like it's unfortunately true. But those were two amazing people that was really disappointing to see. But I think what you're saying, though, is exactly right. And what I think, there was an anchor on the news this week that made the comment that was actually kind of funny and said, I can't believe as a grown man who has spent his life trying to get into journalism and get on the air and is now as a national audience, I am talking about the genitals of a toy potato. And I just think this is absolutely ridiculous. And so, like you said, I think a lot of times there's things like that don't really affect people. And I never really thought of it that way before. Making that difference in two different kinds of cancel cultures, but it is much more difficult when it's a person. And if you look at the history of recent cancel culture people, it's amazing how many people kind of skirt by. And you look at someone like Bill Clinton, who, I think he was an amazing politician, which is how he's got through all of this. No matter what you think about him as a person, politician-wise, he's one of the greatest in history because he's been able to skate by with almost no repercussions. But if he did that today, I mean, I'd be interested to see what the reaction would be. And I think, Gretchen, you had a question, though. You said there were some things in the post that seemed to maybe conflict with each other. And I want to talk about that a little bit because I didn't necessarily agree with the way you were saying it, but I want to see pieces.
I want to pick it up here. I have to look at it again.
Well, while you're looking that up, I would actually, I think one thing that's kind of a weird overlap piece, though, with some cancel culture of things versus people. I'm just going to bring this up as an example of something that happened recently. Land O'Lakes butter. Are you familiar with Land O'Lakes butter? At all?
Yeah.
Is that it's random? You know they used to have a female Indian chief or a chieftain?
Oh, yes, on the container.
Well, they apparently got rid of that Indian woman about a year ago, and it's one of those things that gets interesting where it starts bringing in today's situations with actual or logos and people of the past with people from today, because the guy who actually did it, I did a little research into the logo. It was a guy named Patrick Desjardins, and he was an Ojibwe American Indian artist. And what he wanted to do, his goal in life, and his son said this in an article about it, which is also linked on researchthenews.org. His son said after the label was removed, he said his dream was to teach non-Indian people about the beauty and dignity of the Ojibwe traditions. And that's one of the things that gets tricky because it's a bunch of people that are not Native Americans or not Indigenous Americans, and they're saying, hey, this is an offensive thing, and they're removing it. But the son of the guy who created it is saying his whole goal in life, I think it's Wisconsin, there's a whole exhibit of the work that Patrick Desjardins has done, and we're just erasing it from history because we, as someone who is, I'm guessing, a white person, said this is offensive and we're going to get rid of it. And that's where it starts crossing lines. Now this guy who was very proud of his father just saw his father's history erased, which is a tough thing to see. So
totally. I don't know if we want to go back to what Gretchen was going to talk about.
Keep going. No, this is good. I know you're good.
I honestly, from my experience as a African American, but I'm the child of immigrants. So I'm first generation Nigerian American. So I kind of have a perspective from two different sides, being Black in America and also being a child of immigrants. But, you know, I have these conversations with my parents, and sometimes, this is the honest truth, we laugh at a lot of this because we just say to ourselves, we're not concerned about this stuff.
Yeah.
You know, like my parents, you know, honestly, my parents came over to the US almost 40 years ago from Nigeria. And when they hear about Dr. Seuss book, a Dr. Seuss book being canceled. Now I know that's, you know, the term is like, it's not really been canceled. They pulled it, but whatever.
Yeah. Right.
And one of the reasons is that, you know, the character who was black was wearing a skirt made of, was it like a grass skirt?
I don't even remember.
My parents were like, do they know that Africans wear grass skirts? Like, my parents laugh at a lot of this because they see America as, and I don't mean to generalize everybody, obviously. We never want to do that, right?
Yeah.
But they see a lot of American culture as very, I'm trying to think of a kind word here. But
Just
like,
say it. I feel like
they're like they'll grow a pair, kind of like, and also it's like, if anyone is going to have an issue with it, let it be us. If we don't have an issue with it, why do you have an issue with it? And that's not everybody.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? But yeah.
Well, I think that's tough, and I mean, even going past that, like this just happened yesterday. This is the newest breaking cancel culture apparently, and I just learned this new fun fact this week. Speedy Gonzalez from the Looney Tunes. Are you guys familiar with Speedy Gonzalez? He's the mouse from Mexico.
Yes.
They started a trend on Twitter to cancel Speedy Gonzalez because he's offensive to Mexicans. They said that he was lazy and he had this really thick accent. And I didn't realize how big of an icon Speedy Gonzalez is in Mexican culture. And so they were like, no, he's basically outsmarting these other people. And like
he ran so fast. How could he be lazy? He wasn't lazy.
Yeah. But apparently in general, that's the
running.
theory. And so basically people were like, no, if you come after Speedy, we're coming after you. It was a big thing on Twitter yesterday, but it's the thing where you have to go back to, it's a bunch of people that are interpreting for other people what's wrong. And I think that goes back to the question of where does this morality come from and who is the arbiter of, well, okay, Speedy Gonzalez is offensive. Is it people who are actually Mexican or is it people who see that as a bad caricature? And also, at what level does it become something that is cancelable? And I think when you look at things like the Washington football team, that also, there's a guy named Walter Wetzel, who was a former Blackfeet tribal chairman and past president of the National Congress of American Indians, who designed the logo for the Redskins. It was supposed to honor the culture. And at one point, there was a survey that like 86 or 80% of Native Americans weren't offended at all by the logo, but a bunch of other people were, and they said that's offensive, get rid of it. But it's one of those things to me, and this is probably a bigger issue, and we probably want to get to some questions after this that I have here. But one of the things that it reminds me of, it's like we now have the Washington football team. So the Redskins name is erased. We don't hear it anymore. If you say it, you're considered racist. But we still have terrible conditions and reservations in America. It's like, it reminds me of when George Bush was in front of that mission accomplished sign during the Iraq war and that aircraft carrier, like 2 years into the war. And it was basically saying, we're done. We already fixed this. And here we are 20 years later and we're still there. It's like, okay, we're going to solve the problem of this racist logo, which if it is racist and it's offensive, okay, let's get rid of it. But when it comes down to it, we still have these actual real problems in American Indian culture, and we don't really talk about them. It's not a forefront issue. We don't talk about that terrible, the level of alcoholism, the lack of proper schooling, what happened at the Trail of Tears, all these bad things, but we solved the logo problem. So,
well, I think it can be like, we talk all about small victories. You know what I mean? Like, it's a small step, but it's a step. I mean, even though some people might not have been, I understand what you're saying though about like, why don't we talk to the people who are actually affected by it? But when you're looking at a sports team, Dr. Seuss Enterprises, Mr. Potato Head, and whoever makes Mr. Potato Head, those are free market companies that are making decisions for their companies based on their bottom line and based on public opinion. So what they do is what they want to do. If they don't want to change their product, they're not going to. And Dr. Seuss books have jumped. They have skyrocketed in price. People have been buying them like crazy. So it's like, that might have been who knows? It might have been a calculated, decision on their mark because they knew. I don't. Who knows, right? I'm not trying to make an accusation, but it's like you think like there could be totally more reasons for why people make the decisions that they do. Like there's some virtue signaling, so making decisions.
I wonder about that. Like what decisions go into that. And, because I think that a lot of times when corporations and businesses do that, where they kind of call themselves out, and we're going to change this about ourselves. I think it's a preventative measure because I feel like that in this society where it's almost like they're on the lookout, you
almost want to do it first.
Oh yeah, get to it first. Do not be called out. Call yourself out.
Yep.
So I think that in a way, when people say, oh, well, it's not really canceled, they did it to themselves, I don't think that holds a lot of bearing if indeed that's what's going on, because it's still societal pressure that's leading them to make that decision, if that's what happened.
Sure.
I think it's one of those things where, like, the two examples you used, or that I used that you were talking about, I don't have a problem with the Dr. Seuss organization getting rid of it. I'm a free market guy. I think that's fine.
Right.
But it's weird to see that eBay is banning the sale of those books, but they're not
They
banning
are.
sales
I
of...
didn't see that. I saw that Amazon removed them, but...
Amazon did, but they're still selling Mein Kampf, Adolf Hitler's book. So it's like one of those things where, like, okay, so you can sell a book by Adolf Hitler, but Dr. Seuss is now not allowed. And it's the level that they're going after this is just, it's strange to me. And I think it becomes an untenable situation, because when you talked about the Redskins, that wasn't really a free market decision in my mind, because there were protests. We were going to cancel. I mean, it's
a football team.
Sports,
I mean, people are still going to come to football games. They're not going to stop.
True, but it causes an untenable situation in the sense of, like, now that he did get rid of the logo and the name, there are a lot of people that are upset at him because he caved to the cancel culture. And then there's people that are like, yeah, we won. But at the core of it, like, there was no real way out of it. And even when you read, even before this all happened, the news blogs, the sports blogs, a lot of them only called it the Washington football team. They refused to say Redskins, and they called it racist. And it's interesting because, I mean, I'd like your opinion on this piece. Like, we kind of joked, I think Gretchen and I were talking, and you look at something like the Notre Dame Fighting Irish logo, and it's this drunk leprechaun with this ugly beard, and he's balding, and I'm Irish. I think it's, I mean, whatever. He's making fun of our culture, and that's, like, okay to me. But again, I think this is my question to you, Peace, is where does this moral code come from? And I'm going to ask you the same question, Gretchen, after. But I think when we talk about this, it's like, what is offensive to some people? What's the level that it has to be offensive? Is everything, you can find offense in pretty much anything in society. So if we are going to this level, if it's offensive, get rid of it. What is that barrier, and where does that code of offense come from? And I'd like to ask that to you first, Peace.
Yeah. So I think that there's a lot of things in society that can be found offensive. I mean, you could probably be offended by everything from a tackle on the wall if you really wanted to. But I think that the question is, does it serve a greater agenda? And that's another hot topic word. All right. So I know, but right now there is another hot topic word, woke, right? There's a whole wokeism agenda. Okay. And you're talking to someone, I told this to Ray the other day, I am recently conservative minded. I mean, I got this tattoo, and it's a scale and a cross as a suck it to you to when Donald Trump got elected, because I was like, hold up. Because I was so offended at Christians that would vote for Trump. That was like, don't you know that Jesus stands for justice and Trump is anti-justice? I'm getting a tattoo. That was this girl.
Yeah.
So when I say that I'm now a conservative, you have to realize, like, something changed.
Yeah.
So I say that all that to say that there is a real agenda of, like, I'll call it wokeism, that involves everything that you guys talked about last episode with critical race theory and righting a lot of wrongs, which do need to be righted. History does need to be told accurately. So I think that the foundation of the movement of all of this is so good, but you can ruin a good thing by taking it too far. And so where does that come from? I think right now that we are only responding to things that are offensive if they fall in line with that specific agenda. And that's why no one's doing anything about Mein Kampf. And that's why no one's doing anything about the Irish drunk bald guy with the big belly. And that goes on to, just 2 days ago, I was watching A Different World, and I don't know if you guys know about that show.
Yeah,
Back
that was
like
the spin-off of the Cosby Show, right?
yeah, definitely.
Yep.
So like early 90s, late 80s. I forget exactly where it was, but so I was
I don't
watching
want to date
like
myself, so I've seen it in reruns. We'll say that. I don't want to age myself.
good. So it was a marathon. I forget what station. I watched about 4 episodes in a row. And can I tell you that in each episode, there was something very sexist that was said by a male to a woman. Like, girl, go make my breakfast, or something very, jest and jokingly, but still would never fly, like should never fly in the world we're living in.
Right.
Is anyone gonna try to pull A Different World? What do you guys think? Honestly.
No.
You know why? Because it's Black television.
Yeah.
And this is where the double bias comes in, because that doesn't serve the agenda. Eliminating Black television is not on the agenda. And this is where we have an issue, because we can't just say it's offensive if it affects this person, that person, that person, that person, but it's not offensive if it serves the agenda we want. And I have a real issue with that.
And I want to come back to you, Gretchen, for your where the moral code comes from. But I think 2 things that you said, Peace, that really resonated with me. Number one, when you said history does need to be told, and I think that's important, because we talked last week in the show, and I brought up a quote that basically someone was saying you can't change history, you can't make it better, you can only learn from it. But if you erase it, you can't learn from it, you can't grow. And I think that's so important to do. And we're trying to just, anything that's bad, let's get rid of it. But I think the second part there, when you're talking about like it doesn't fit the agendas, I what I like about you when you say you kind of went to being a conservative person, you seem to have the mindset of what I think a conservative person in this mode is. I don't want anything canceled. I hate Nazism. I hate the idea that people could think that white race is supreme to the black race. There's a lot of things out there now that black race is superior. There's all these things where we're superior because of our race only, and there's so many things I don't like, and I hate hearing. But I think we should be fighting to be able to hear it, because again, where that moral code comes from right now, it may be okay to talk like this, but in the future, if we kind of caved the idea that you have to only go with what's socially acceptable, and you have to start limiting what you say to meet those standards, that becomes a standard that can adjust to and from. And I think that's the problem I have even with conservatives, that they come back and say, well, let's go cancel this person. And it's like, oh, here, we're going to show you, we'll do the same thing to someone from your end. And it's like, with Andrew Cuomo, for instance, he has some serious sexual allegations against him. I think they should be investigated. And if they're true, he should be either tried civilly or tried from a legal perspective, from a criminal instance. But at the core of it, what I hope for him is that he has a fair trial, just like I hope for anybody, because I think that's the thing. And there's so many people that I've seen say, all right, well, go get him because that's what happened to Brett Kavanaugh. And it's like, well, great. Like, you complained about it then. You should be complaining about it now if that happens. And that's the issue I have with, if we just kind of step aside and say, we're going to go attack that other side. So, Gretchen, do you think that is where does that moral code come from? So when you think something is offensive, where does that come from for you? Like, are you bringing that from what society is saying, what you know from talking to people? Kind of where do you say, all right, I'm going to get frustrated. Sorry, that seems very patronizing. I'm going to rephrase that, and I apologize. What I'm saying is, if you see something you're offended by, what is it typically that makes you offended by that thing? That's probably a better way of saying it.
I feel like, okay, there's multiple places that it's coming from. I think it's more of a gut. It's a feeling of uneasiness. And when I'm somebody who does not like confrontation. So when I feel confrontation coming on, I can shut down. And whenever I see things that have to do with race or gender or someone being mistreated or someone being misrepresented, that uneasiness comes in to me. And I think it's my empathy, quite honestly. I think we were talking about this last episode. I have like a really high empathy. Thanks, Mom, a lot. But I feel a lot, and so they joke a lot. Like, liberals are really like just bleeding hearts, and we're all like just all about feelings. But for me, it really is. I really have a lot of emotion when it comes to seeing people in hurt situations and stuff like that. So I often look to people and try to hear what their feelings are, and not that I take on their emotions and their concerns, but I listen to them, and I think I take on some of that feeling from them. So I think that's just really where a lot of it comes from.
So with that being said, that's the problem that I have oftentimes with going based off of feelings. Because when you're going based off of feelings, if one person is, and that's what I've heard even about like the situation with the Redskins, if one person is offended, then that's too much.
Yeah.
And to me, that's not really a great way to think about it, because if one person was offended by anything and we had to cancel it, everything is canceled. This would be a very boring society.
Yeah, I think
So,
a lot.
well, my question to
sorry,
you would be like, what level is it? And we kind of talked about this before, but like, what is so the gut feeling that wouldn't help me if I'm looking at like, okay, this is something that's happening because 20% of the people, 50% doesn't have to be a number, but what level does it get to the point where you're like, I'm uncomfortable enough to say Dr. Seuss should be gone, or the Redskins should be gone, whatever it may be, or this person who did something should be gone. What makes that switch to you where you're uncomfortable with it and you just feel for that person versus I want to get rid of that?
I can't even quantify that. It's just because there's so many different situations. I think when it comes to like the football team, it's like, why is it even called that? Like I never understood. I mean, even when I was a kid, I was like, there's a football team called the Redskins? Really? Like when I was a kid. So it's like getting older and then having people go, this isn't okay. And I'd be like, okay, I always kind of thought it wasn't okay. I mean, I went to a school that the mascot was the Raider, but it was a Chief's head. Like it didn't make any sense. Like the logo didn't make any sense. But I mean, and we did things, I was telling Ray about it too. We had a conversation about this. We did like an Indian dance where we like did the whole thing and everybody was doing the tomahawk chop, and they got rid of a lot of it, over the years, but they still do the dance, and they, it's so there's still elements of it that exist, but I think it's like whenever you get to the point where you can make a conscious decision that it's okay to say we're wrong and to change, like I feel like that's what people are afraid to say, that they're wrong.
Well, I would say one thing, I'm just going to jump in because one of the things you brought up was interesting. Because you said, I don't even know where that came from and why they would be okay saying the Redskins. So
you
the
said
Redskins
that they
team,
were that they had made the logo based on, which I didn't know that as a kid though. Like,
well, so that was in like 72 or 78 that they changed that logo. But initially they were the Boston Braves. So football teams used to move around a lot.
Sure.
Actually, football history is my grandfather had a book about pro football history that we read together, and I love pro football history. But they were the Boston Braves, and they moved to Washington, and the owner at the time had a coach who was Native American. And so when they moved, he still wanted to keep the American Indian theme, but he wanted to avoid, because there were some other Braves around, like baseball teams and other places. So he changed it to the Redskins to honor the coach. So initially, even back then, it was as an honor to someone on the team. And then when they redid the logo back in the 1970s, it was done with a tribal chief and someone who was very involved and was on the National Tribal Council. So that's where it gets tricky for me. It's like, I hear you, and like there's that saying that I actually hate because I feel like it automatically shuts down conversation, but it's the whole facts don't care about feeling.
Sure.
Your facts don't care about feelings.
Well, and this is
I actually I do care about feelings, and I do care if people are hurt, but I think part of it is just we get so upset. We get this mob going of like the Redskins are bad, and then you don't look at why they were actually formed in the first place.
I wonder why we don't have more conversations, like critical thinking conversations, because it's like if something comes out like that, why isn't there a huge campaign by the company saying this is why we do this, like Land O'Lakes, like we were talking about that?
Well, because it gets censored.
Yeah,
I was just it gets censored. There's so much information out there where, and not even just information. There are people do combat the, I guess, fake news. I don't know. It's weird to use fake news in that frame of mind.
There's about 50% of the listeners who just stopped listening to anything you said now, Peace, because you used the term fake news.
We just got demonetized.
So we're done. We're done. Yeah.
Crazy though. You know what's crazy? It's like 2 years ago, these used to just be words.
Yeah.
And now they carry such weight. That's like, can't they just go back to being words? But anyways,
right.
But even regardless of the fact that there are news, there's information with a spin. I mean, every news source has a spin these days. It's just the way it's, whether you're on the right, whether you're on the left.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to wade through the opinion, the public opinion, to get to the history, because even now, like, the history is now coded in opinion. You don't get to formulate your own opinion. It's so hard to form an opinion. anymore.
And that's
So
what we hope to do here is dig a little deeper. And that's the thing, like I as the progressive co-host here, I want to hear your thoughts about like why I should be thinking more about the feelings behind things. But the goal is to get some of these facts out. And I think that's the problem I have. Like when you look at the history of Aunt Jemima, there's like a debated history. And that's the thing where you try to find, I've heard stories that she was a former slave who was at a national fair promoting pancakes, and then became like the first Aunt Jemima character was set for life, and she had really enjoyed the role. And there's some interesting things that you can kind of pull from that. And then I've also heard that's not true, and she died penniless. And it's like I just want to know the truth. And at the very core of it, I think it's that hard. Like I think that's one of those things. We're going back to what you said though, where you talk about feeling uncomfortable. Like when I look at a lot of things that are canceled, I go, okay, that doesn't seem that bad to me. Or like I look and see the people are actually defending it, like the Speedy Gonzalez thing. But like Aunt Jemima, that was always one that it felt a little weird to me. Like I don't know why. It's like one of those things where but I think that's where we have to have a real discussion about it. It's funny that we have to have a real discussion about a pancake spokesperson, but if there is actual pain being caused from that, and if there's a history and it's a racist caricature, like I'm all for getting rid of it. But what I don't trust is that we're actually having honest conversations about these things that aren't biased. Because I mean, even just something simple like the Redskins football team, like the news, sports, I think the assumption would be that if you're reading sports websites, they're probably these men that are just conservative, and they're just like the old school, we hate that they're changing it. But pretty much every article I read was, we need to change this. And that shows like how prevalent, the liberal viewpoints are in the media. And that doesn't mean they're wrong. If it actually is offensive, let's talk about it, but let's get to the truth of what it is. So
no, I agree with that 100%. I don't think that, we shouldn't be getting rid of things that people, if it's like the Aunt Jemima stuff, things like that. But I think like whenever you're looking at cancel culture in the sense of like the lens that we're looking at it through, whenever we have to differentiate what is actually cancel culture and what is holding people accountable for their actions. Do you know what I mean? So even like just thinking about like, if somebody's coming out and they're really doing some awful crap, we should probably, that's the capitalism in our country. We should be able to make the choice to not support or support. But even then, it's like going back to Dr. Seuss, like they're making a lot of money right now. So it's like they're taking the chance and it's paying off, Yeah. And I think I think they made a calculated choice, and their bottom line is not so bottom anymore.
Yeah. Well, I think that's, go ahead, Peace.
No, I was like, I wish there was a way to poll the people that are truly affected by these things before you just make it. Because in a way, another loaded term, white savior complex. Because in a way, and this is the confusion of what being so. I asked this question on social media months ago. I was like, can you be so woke that you're asleep? Where you're trying so hard, like people are trying so hard to fix the racism, that they are making decisions for people who actually have a voice. I know what the character in the Dr. Seuss book, the one, I guess he was Chinese and his eyes were slanted and he had the chopsticks. And I'm like, well, are Chinese individuals offended by this individual, by this character illustration? Are they? One could say, let's say they drew the character's eyes more circular. Well, then they could be accused of Europeanizing. It's not a word, but I just made it up. The Chinese figure. So it's like you can't win either way. But let's ask. Because if they're not offended, then don't take this into your own hands to decide what's offensive to these people when they have a voice. They have a voice, and we have a voice. And in some ways, being an immigrant of Africans, I almost feel like don't you want to ask us? What our culture is like, what it's like in Africa. Do people in indigenous areas in Africa wear these things? Would you like to know? But no one wants to know anymore.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the second part of that, like you had talked about how we need to tell history, and we need, even if we find something is offensive. So I think it's important to actually talk about why it's offensive. So when I saw these things coming out about Dr. Seuss, it was like one guy on Twitter. I think Twitter is a cesspool, but I always like to get some basic idea of how the cesspool is working. But someone posted an actual question and said, I'm not trying to be offensive here. I just wonder, like someone said they're eating with chopsticks. They said, why is this offensive? They said they're eating with chopsticks. And in the initial versions of the book, their skin was yellow. And he was like, he was like, a serious question. Don't they eat with chopsticks? Like, is that not a thing? And they were like, well, if you're too racist, and it just became this whole thing of like him asking a question became a racist thing. And if you just say to someone, I think that's really important. Like, I think there are a lot of people that if you explained why, if someone who is Native American, not someone who has a white savior complex like you talked about, comes in and says, hey, this is why it's offensive to us, let's talk about it. I think that's a great conversation to have, and you can have some dialogue about it. But it's now just, okay, you're canceled and you're wrong, or you're a fascist. Yesterday, this was another situation that came up talking about canceling people. One of the guys in Mumford and Sons, the band, posted a tweet about Andy No's book, who, if you're not familiar with him, he's does a lot of research on Antifa, what's happening in Portland, and people towards the left hate him, people towards the right like him. But someone wrote like, that's it. Like, I'm not buying his music anymore. I'm not going to talk to him. He's a fascist now. We've always known he's a fascist. And I always, when I hear people calling people fascist and saying, we're going to shut you down, we don't want you to speak, I think about Princess Bride, that scene where it's like, I don't think that word means what you think it means. I feel like the whole term fascism is like not letting someone with a different point of view speak. And that's what's happening with cancel culture. And so, to me, that's the big issue there. There's no dialogue. It shuts down opportunities. And I think what you said, Peace, that really stuck with me is you said it's enacting a punishment, but it's devoid of the opportunity for redemption. So at the core of it, I don't think Mr. Potato Head's feelings are going to be hurt. And I think it's kind of a silly debate that we have about Mr. Potato Head, but things like Mumford and Sons now becoming I haven't heard of that band in 2 years, and all of a sudden now they're a hot topic, and he's a fascist who hates anyone that looks different. And so I think that's where it comes into, can we actually have a discussion and read a book anymore? And they're literally saying, you can't read that book or else you're a fascist. So I think with that being said, Gretchen, I think, like, should we cancel, even if we do think something's bad? So we may have to cancel certain logos if everyone comes to agreement that it should be, or it just makes people feel uncomfortable. But things like books that are offensive, even Dr. Seuss, should we cancel things so people avoid the discomfort, or should we keep them and learn from them? I think from your perspective, where do you fall on that spectrum?
I have two. One, I think, again, that we should be okay with saying that we've made mistakes. But on the other hand, and this is kind of cute. When I was leaving my hometown today, I saw one of my 5th grade teachers. She gave me a whole bunch of antiques. And, but I was telling her about the podcast, and I asked her what she thought. And she said, when it comes to books, she draws a line. Because she feels like not only that it's history, but that we can learn from our mistakes, or learn from the mistakes that were written. And then when we stop and we take them away, it goes out of our memory and we never think about it again. And I believe both. I think it's okay to say, you know what, maybe we just don't want to have this book around anymore. I think that's okay. But I think it's okay to say, yeah, we want to have this book around and learn from it. And I think it's a per book basis. I think that it's like, Mein Kampf, it's a history book to understand what in the world was going on in his head, right? For Dr. Seuss, it's a little kid's book, so for Dr. Seuss, the company making that decision, I'm okay with a little kid not seeing a stereotype of an Asian person running a zoo. You know what I mean? Like, I just think it's a per issue basis.
Now, so that takes the opportunity, though, and I think this is something I want to ask you about, Peace. So that is saying that we as a government or whatever body, that's the thing that I have an issue with all this, is like, we have now. Yeah, but even if you're not doing it from a governmental perspective, even if you say like you have this culture that's built, whether we want to call it cancel culture, if there's this giant machine that's working against Dr. Seuss, is it up to the hands of the publisher? Should we even make the publisher stop selling it, or should we just allow parents to decide, like, is this something I want my kids to read? And I think that question goes to you, Peace. Where do you draw the line on whether it's governmental oversight or the mob I don't want to say mob mentality, that's very leading, the crowd mentality of canceling versus like allowing individuals to say, hey, I want my kids to read this? Because I think at the core of it, I think that's where it gets a little tricky, because like Peace is saying that she doesn't really find that offensive. So why should we say you as a black woman aren't allowed to show this, and an immigrant from Africa aren't allowed to show this book to your kids because it is a bad caricature of Africans, but I'm a white person saying that. It just seems weird to me. So Peace, again, that's a loaded question, but you can take that from whatever angle you want.
Totally. And I would say, though, on top of, to add to that, context is helpful too.
Yeah.
So I think that sometimes we don't always have to jump to the extreme of canceling. We can just give context. Hey, not everybody in Africa dresses like this. A lot of people do. When you're in the village, you're going to see it. When you're in the big cities, you won't, but that's just like simple context could fix a lot of this stuff,
Yeah.
But honestly, I think I'm trying to give a well-rounded answer here. I don't really think government censorship is ever a good thing, ever. And I hope we can all agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think it's very, it is understandable to allow individuals to make a decision that's best for them and their families, and to allow corporations and businesses, the free market, to make the decision on what they want to put out there and what they don't. So, I mean, that's just the way the world works. But wow, what's happening is like you have the product and you have the receiver, but what's getting in the way in the middle is the mob mentality. So you actually aren't allowing these individual decisions to be made because the cultural influence is so, it's such a force now in this day and age that the suggestive powers, the peer pressures that those things are influencing decisions that maybe these individuals wouldn't have made if they just used their own critical thinking facilities.
Right.
And same for these corporations and businesses. Maybe they wouldn't have made if they didn't fear that they'd be put out of business.
Sure.
So that's where all of this stuff that's happening in the middle, this mob mentality, which I think is a great word that you've used, Ray, is getting in the way. It's not helpful whatsoever. I don't believe it's helpful. I think that people at the end of the day have the ability to decide what's good for them and what's not good for them. But I see us slowly creeping towards making decisions for people, really stripping them of their autonomy to decide what's best for themselves. And I don't know if we're yet we're definitely going, I think we're certainly moving in a direction of more and more government control. I think that's kind of where things are headed. And we may not all agree on that, but I do feel that way. But I think what the step we're at, that's before that step, is big tech censorship. And right now, we may even argue that they're more powerful than the government in many ways. Yeah. They certainly have more influence. So that's where the danger is, I think, right now.
And I think that goes back to even what you were talking about, Gretchen, with there's different forms of it. And I think that's one of the problems I have, is that you can basically cancel whoever you want to. And like Donald Trump, I'm going to go back to something. I think the number one rule of politics, from what I heard from a couple of former White House press secretaries recently, is you should never compare things to the Nazis. Once you do that, it's just kind of like it's a bad thing. But I think that's kind of always been the standard, where it's like, all right, like in Germany, I am all for the government having no censorship and not censoring anything. I think it should be open and free. And if you look through history, problems come in when government starts censoring things. But in Germany, they have a rule that you can only display Nazi symbols if it's in a historical setting. You can't actually display them, but it's just like you could put them in a museum, but you can't distribute pamphlets. And it's one of those things where I'm like, okay, I love free speech. I think everyone should be able to do whatever they want. But in Germany, I understand why they wouldn't want to have that. But I think that's kind of like the litmus test for me, where it's like, okay, should the government say you shouldn't have Nazi symbols? Even in America, I think we didn't have the same problems as Germany. So I'm like, again, I dislike you people with all of my heart, and I think you're misguided, but how about we talk about it and explain why you're wrong, as opposed to saying, don't shut it down, because I think that actually hurts the problem more than it helps. But we've moved to this symbol. I think the Nazis are always kind of like, okay, that's one exception. Nazis, okay, I can be for like shutting that down. But now we keep moving the bar lower and lower and lower. Yeah. And it's exhausting. I don't want to have to think about which fast food place I'm allowed to eat at, because, one has one political view and one doesn't. One person donates to this person, one doesn't. And I think that's where it gets real tricky. And I think in general, I think a lot of people are finally getting upset and frustrated enough to say, hey, like, let's tone this down. And I think the pendulum often swings back and forth. And this isn't new. This isn't a liberal only thing. I think right now cancel culture tends to be liberal. But when you look at the initial cancel culture in America, it was during like the whole time of communism, and it was the McCarthy hearings, and it was anyone who, you could just say someone was a communist and that person would be canceled. There was blacklists in Hollywood. But when you look at history and you see what happened in that time period, the same things are happening now. The only problem is you also have big tech, like you talked about, that can back up any of those things that are happening, where then you still had conversations, you still talk to your neighbors, and now it's like, okay, well, you're off Twitter because you said something that is offensive. And that's where we start running into problems. So I don't know. I think that we should censor nothing if possible and just let people decide, because I think this is all like, I think this is oftentimes bleak, and people get, if you read that cesspool of Twitter, you just get very discouraged. I know I do. But at the core of it, I am always shocked at how many people there are in the world, how many people we have in America, how diverse we are. We are one of the most diverse countries in the world, and yet we still have relatively few problems. And when I'm not talking about I'm not talking about systemic racism. I'm not talking about any of those issues. We can talk about those in another show. I'm talking about person-to-person communication. Everyone's going to have terrible people that do terrible things, but the fact that we have 360 million people in this country and we don't every day have some kind of giant bombing is actually shocking to me. That we have people that are generally can self-discipline, and I'm all for letting those people navigate ourselves and trying to get government out as much as possible. But I think that's where it kind of overlaps a little bit with government versus people. And I feel like I just rambled for 10 minutes. So Gretchen, there's a lot there that I said. Did anything stick out that you thought, oh, I agree with that, or I hate that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think now we're living in this digital age where everybody can post exactly what they're thinking, and there's little repercussion. There was little repercussion for a really long time, and people were putting some pretty heinous stuff on the internet. And I think it's caught up with people. I actually, I was threatened to be canceled because I brought to someone's attention that we could read what they wrote. They threatened to cancel me. It was a really random post on one of the Pittsburgh news stations. I can't even remember what it was about. And I was reading through the comments and I was like, this is insane. Like, this was not like long ago. This was probably about 6-8 months ago. And I was reading these comments and they were just awful. And all I wrote was, you guys know that we can read what you're writing, right? And this guy, he went to my page, took a screenshot of my Facebook page that had my jobs, because I wasn't really on Facebook took a photo of my did a screenshot of my whole Facebook page with my work. And he's like, here she is, everybody. Let's cancel Gretchen. And I was like, what the crap?
Yeah.
Wow. And it's like, and he's like, she works at all these places. And I was like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me right now? And I took screenshots of everything because I was like, dude. And this close, I was like, you're not that hard to find either. Like, and I found him on LinkedIn with his jobs. And I was like, and it's like, I would never, ever, ever do that to somebody, ever. But the fact that he was just so quick, it was that quick. And for no reason. So,
no reason.
And I have done way worse things than that. So, I mean, I'm shocked that I haven't been canceled. My co-founder sent me a text. He can't get onto the video, and he said his wife said, it looks like we got canceled. So, even though they can't watch it, she assumed that Facebook shut us down. So
they shut us. They were like, it's too long. You guys are running your mouths.
You guys messed up once. Ray said something about Nazis. It's done. It's all over. So, I think we probably should start wrapping up here. And I think one of the things we want to do is talk about what's next, what we learned today. So if you guys want to think about that. One thing I'd say to you, Gretchen, though, when you just said there about getting canceled, that's the problem I have too, is if we don't, as a society, say, hey, this is not okay. We need to have actually due process, just like what Peace said at the beginning. Yeah. I'm going to say it one more time because I loved it. Enacting a punishment, cancel culture is enacting a punishment, but the punishment is devoid of the opportunity for redemption. Yeah. The problem is today, no one alive today will be woke enough in 2060 if we keep going at this rate. So all of us are going to end up being canceled. And so I think that's the thing where we have to come to a conclusion. If there's, like I said, if there are things that are actually need to be canceled, I'm all for it. And there's things that I've seen that I go, oh, now that you've explained it to me, now I see why that's offensive. But the conversation is important. And
Yeah.
that's actually what I'm going to talk about in my what's next. So wrapping up here, before I just had the last word because I just started speaking, but I'd like to say, if you guys have any last words, feel free to throw them in, and then I'm going to ask you what you might have learned and what's next for us. So Gretchen, you go first. Anything else you want to add to that, or?
No, I think you pretty much summed it up. I feel like, in a lot of these conversations, we all want the same outcome. It's just how to get there. I think for me, my what's next is I want to, I said this actually last week too, which is kind of weird that I'm saying it again, but I want to utilize more people in my circle to gain insight into things that I don't know about.
Yeah.
And even just talking to my elementary school teacher, like, put that into perspective about the books. Like, I'm like, nobody even knows what those books are. Why would anybody care? And she was like, when it comes to books, that's like where I draw the line. And she's like, I would read those to my, kids every year. And she goes, we read 3 of those books, in the Dr. Seuss series. So, and it's like, I didn't even think about that. So sometimes just talking to other people and gaining perspective into someone else's view on a subject can really, I don't want to say alter your perspective, but it can widen your perspective, and you can, and I feel like what we're going through right now, it's fluid. We should be okay to meander down this little river that we're on, because it's going to keep changing, and we're going to keep evolving, and new problems are going to pop up and things are going to resolve. But we all have to remember that we're all part of a bigger thing, and we have to care about each other. And oh my gosh, I'm so corny.
And
you know what I mean?
I'm glad you said it, and I didn't have to
love each other. But
yeah.
I do really feel that. I feel like when we stop caring about the person that's on the other side of that screen, it's the dehumanization of the person in the text.
Yeah.
So we end up putting our own thoughts. And like I was going to say about your stuff, like I was putting myself in, and what I was getting from it, and taking you out of the mix, So it's like, I have no idea where she's coming from. So I'm putting my own thought, right? So that was the problem. And so when we don't know people and we're reading it, we tend to, it just becomes convoluted, and we get lost. So I think it's
important that when you can see people face to face, because the things that she was saying about you behind your back piece, it was so offensive.
You have to understand, he gives
terrible.
me crap all the time. He was calling me Antifa all last week.
I was, yeah.
Well, you are wearing black, I think, right? So.
Well, we both are, so I guess we're both Antifa.
I do have the side of my head shaved. So.
Yeah. You kind
I'm all kind of anarch.
Yeah. But I think at the core of it, like, I am obviously joking for people who I don't pick up on the sarcasm from listening.
Yeah.
But I think it's one of those things that's very hard, even if you are frustrated by someone, when you see them face to face. And that's a whole nother episode we can talk about with social media and how it rots the brains.
Yeah,
but
it really does.
Oh my
we'll do that later. Peace. Anything you'd like to say to wrap up?
No, I mean, you said it all, Gretchen. I think that's the problem. We just have to remember that, there's humanity behind every post, every tweet, whatever, every Instagram, whatever. Instagram seems to be the safest place to be, though, right about now.
I love it. It's the only place I live.
Oh,
Facebook only gets action because of my Instagram account.
Yeah, seriously. Oh my gosh. I agree. Yeah, but I mean, and that's unfortunately like the most heartbreaking thing about what we've been going through the last year and a couple months, or a year and a month or so, is that we haven't had the opportunity to see each other face to face. And oh man, it's like, and this is everybody, I'm sure, to an extent is guilty of this, but when you are not seeing someone face to face and you're interacting with them behind a screen, the things that you are able to say that you would never say to someone's face.
You would never say no.
Are sometimes appalling. And so I think that as we I honestly, this is probably one of the most hopeful thoughts I've had in a while, because I haven't had a lot of really hopeful thoughts about where we are as a nation. But I think that as we get back to being able to see and interact with people, I do hope that some of this will begin to even itself out. We'll see more pacifying of the situation. But just remembering the humanity within each other, I think is where we go from here. And we just keep that at the forefront of our minds. And we realize that we're not as different or on the opposite ends of the spectrum as we think. I feel like it's a facade. I want to tell people, like, don't believe the hype.
No.
Don't believe the hype. And then you could have a whole nother podcast on media and their role in all of this.
Yeah.
But I just
media
think,
and politicians and media are just
my
just
gosh,
terrible.
They are literally writing the narrative as we sit back and just
digest it. Yep.
Oh my gosh. I wrote, well, that's another situation. But anyways, we're just eating it up and we're like, yeah, they're right. They're right. And before you know it, you've formed a whole new worldview, so we just have to be really careful about what we ingest, what we watch, what we listen to. And I tell people, like, the best thing you could do is just, unplug the TV and take a fast from social media and just remember who you are again without being influenced by all these other voices.
Yeah.
But I really do believe, and it's kind of a catchy phrase now, but I feel like I hope I was one of the first to say it. I don't think so. But I always say cancel culture will cancel itself. It has to. Yeah. Because if people on the right are getting canceled, people on the left are getting canceled. And it is happening on both sides. It's maybe not to the same extent, but it certainly is. And I'm certainly seeing both sides begin to speak up about it. So eventually, if you cancel everyone, there's no one left. Someone said that earlier. So I do think that's where we're headed. And I think it's a really good thing if that happens. So.
Well, I think you summed up the what's next question great. So I think what I'll ask you to what you may have learned today from each other, probably not me, but anything you guys learned, and then I'm going to finish up with just what my next step is and what I learned from you guys. So Gretchen, you want to start out with something you learned today on this podcast? That's not a good start when you say I feel like there should be like 12
caught me off
things.
guard. I was kind of like,
I told you from the beginning. You're my co-host. I know this is coming. Yeah.
I'm always like, my brain's going 30,000 miles a minute. I'm going to come back to just listening and opening my mind. And I feel like more people need to do it. Even just like, I was talking to my mom actually this morning about everything like this. And my mom's very conservative too. And it was wild listening to her like converse with me for the first time where she didn't get upset. Sorry, Mom. Sometimes she gets upset when we talk about politics. It just happens. And this was the first time where she was like, I just, just want everybody just to be happy. And why does everybody have to be so unhappy with everything? I was like, yeah, Mommy, yeah. But
I think that's what most people want. They have different ways of getting to happiness, but the end goal is still, I want everyone to be happy. The same.
I want everybody just to be happy. I don't want anybody to hurt. Yeah.
Yeah.
Peace, what's something you learned today?
You know what? I learned, this is kind of an introspective moment, but that things are more hopeful than I think they are sometimes.
Yeah.
And we're going through this roller coaster, right? Because I have like super hopeful days when I'm just like, it's going to be okay. And other days when I'm like, we're going to hell. But I'm realizing now that every time that I have a conversation with someone on the opposite end of the spectrum that goes really well, I am just infused with like joy and gladness. I'm like,
that makes me feel good
this
too.
This is the answer. Yeah. But this is where we go. This is how we do it. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to cut that part out and use it as the commercial for our show. So we did not, just to be clear, we didn't pay her to say that. But yeah, she's saying that this is the best podcast in history that's coming from Peace Ike. So, we're going to save America.
I'm her most famous liberal ever.
Yes. I mean, this is so great. So what I learned actually was from you, Gretchen, because I mean, no offense to you, Peace, we just agreed on most things. But I think Gretchen, I think there's something that I often overlook, and maybe this is the same case now for the formerly liberal, now conservative Peace, that I often dismiss the feel test. And when you talk about, I think that's something I overlook, where it's like, if it doesn't seem like it should bother someone, oftentimes I'm kind of like, well, why are we even talking about this? But I feel like I need to get better at being addressing my feelings more. And that's something I want to focus on.
Yeah.
And I think in general too, I talked about virtue projecting, but I often do that, not even to the sense I love talking with people who disagree with me. I love it. Like I thrive on it. But there are some times where I won't talk to someone because I think, not because they have a different viewpoint, but I think they're going to be someone that won't be open to having a conversation. Yeah. So it's not that they have a different viewpoint. It's that they wouldn't want to talk about their viewpoint in a way that's reasonable. And now I've run into people who I thought would be reasonable and who weren't, and vice versa. But at the core of it, I need to stop virtue projecting, which if that isn't a term, I'm gonna trademark it and start using that in our promos as well. But thank you both for being on here. We're gonna wrap up with we're doing one good thing from everyone, but for length of time, I'm just gonna wrap up. I want to tell you both a story. I think I told Gretchen this already, but when we talk about this goes back to what you said, Peace, about like having hopefulness. My best friend's 5-year-old son loves playing the video game Fortnite, and he's been getting myself, his dad, his older brother, his uncle. We've all been playing Fortnite with him several times a week. He wants to play every night, but we can only fit some in. He's 5 years old, sweet little kid, and in this game, you have a team and you're trying to get rid of the other team. And if you're not familiar with the game, there's this thing called the storm. And so as people exit the game when they're knocked off, the storm gets smaller and smaller because they want to keep the less amount of people in an enclosed space. So if you get stuck in the storm, your life starts dropping. So that being said, he and I were running. We got caught in the storm. We weren't fast enough. We were just kind of dilly-dallying. And I was ahead of him, and he was behind me. And he had a little bit more life than me. But I died. Like my character passed out basically. But in the game, you can revive someone. But you can't do it in the storm. And so I told Johnny, I was like, I said, go forward, run. I said, don't stop for me. And he was like, no, Uncle Ray, I'm saving you. And I was like, no. And it was one of the most emotional moments. I felt like I was in like an old war movie, but I was like, no. He was like, I'm carrying you. And he picks me up and he starts trying to run with me to get me out of that storm. No. And we ended up both dying. Mm-hmm. But my heart was filled because it was in like the emotion that happened in a video game, which normally it's just like, all right, let's play and have some fun. I was moved, and it's actually stuck with me all week. And seeing that from a 5-year-old have that kind of concern, not for himself,
and compassion,
but for other people, that compassion. I'm going to save you, Uncle Ray, and just ran with me. It was a great thing to see. And really so when I think about hopefulness, that's the kind of stuff I think about. So that's the one good thing for this week.
One good thing.
But yeah, so I want to say thank you to both of you for being on here.
Peace,
thanks for taking time out of your schedule. Both times we started this podcast. For those listening, whether it's on the Facebook that I'll be reposting or whether that's live in the podcast, please feel free to share this podcast with friends. If Peace's support of ours isn't enough, I'll say it too. We're going to change America. I don't know. That sounded very politician-y. I'm going to stop that. That was creepy. But we appreciate when people share. We're brand new, so we want to have more trolls making fun of our YouTube videos, and we want to eventually have them on the show. And if you want to be part of the show, go to researchthenews.com. You can fill out a form. We'll contact you if you have a topic you want to discuss. And other than that, I want to just say thanks again for being on here, and we're going to wrap up for the week. So, Gretchen, Peace. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
And that is Research the News.